Hi, I'm Caitlin Dubin, and this is the Rural Woman Podcast. I'm a first-generation farmer who married into agriculture. Born and raised in a city, I was so unfamiliar with where my food came from, but I was determined to figure it out. Through my journey into agriculture, I saw women who were strong but humble, often taking a back seat. To me, these women were leaders who deserved a seat at the table. I created the Rural Woman Podcast to share the voices of women in an industry whose stories often went untold. The rural entrepreneurs who live and breathe their work, full of grit and pride. We come here to share our stories, to be in community with each other, to be challenged and inspired, but most importantly, to be celebrated and to be heard. We may not all live, farm, ranch, or homestead the same, but we are all connected. We are rural women, and our stories are worthy of being told. Hey friends, we are celebrating the 5th anniversary of the Rural Women Podcast this year, and we are taking a look back through the inspiring stories that have been shared with us throughout the years. Looking back through these interviews, there are women who have been successful, who have persevered, and who have been resilient. There are women who have shared their stories who may not farm or ranch or homestead or work in the business that they used to. Things may be different for them now, but I know their stories have impact. And I hope that this is a solid reminder for those of you who have shared your stories or who are inspired to share your stories. Our stories are forever changing. And just because we may not farm, ranch, or homestead the same, our lives might not look the same. There has been growth here. Through the good, the bad, and the ugly, I think it's a solid reminder for all of us to look back to see how far we've come. So my friends, I hope you enjoy these throwback podcast episodes coming your way, and thank you for being here and for helping me celebrate the incredible stories of women in agriculture through the Rural Woman Podcast over the last 5 years. Enjoy. This week, you'll meet Kathryn Laframboise.
I'm Kathryn Laframboise. I'm the owner of the Raspberry Roost, a farm located on Treaty 1 territory. I currently am more of a fiber farmer. So what that means is I raise alpacas, sheep, and rabbits for their fur, not their fur, but their wool, fleece. And then we have that usually made into like yarn. Super exciting. How did I get started? I was a city kid, born and raised, and have always dreamt of living in the country, taking care of the land, taking care of animals. And my partner, who's now my husband at the time, I had always kind of put that bug in his ear about wanting to leave the city. And he was game. He thought it was going to be a life of dirt biking, but he didn't realize my big plans. So I've been out here now. This will be our 5th summer coming up that we've lived out here. But this is probably my first full year of really great farm activities.
I want to talk about the sustainability piece on your farm. You did your research and got into the fiber farming so you could have your sheep and your cute, fluffy Angora bunnies. They are to die for, and they have the greatest hair. I have hair envy of them. Tell us more about the process for you with your animals and your fiber animals. Tell us about, the yearly process of taking their fiber and what you're turning it into.
Right. Animals that grow wool are carbon sequestering. So they take grazable area, so land that's growing, eventually reaches a point where there's not too much actual growth happening. So the amount of carbon they're storing kind of pauses. So then you take an animal that grows wool or fleece to graze over that, and the carbon then actually becomes stored within the fiber. So that's how it grows. And so then your land is now growing back all the grasses, and that becomes, again, an area where carbon can store. And so it's just this really awesome cycle where, you're tending to the land in an appropriate way. These animals are loving their lives, living the best life. And then you shear them once a year for the sheep, alpacas, and llama. And then that gets turned into yarn or other usable fibers. Like some people do felting. Some people use it for bedding, insulation. You can use it in gardening. I know there's lots of gardeners on here. And our wool mill that we use is within 60 kilometers from here. So it's a pretty cool process to have everything done so locally. And same thing, our feed is either on farm, so we have grazable land, or our hay is also within, I guess, probably that 75-kilometer mark as well.
This week, you'll meet Suzette Chaumette.
So my name is Suzette Chaumette. I live in Northern California in the San Francisco Bay Area. I am the founder of Food Indie, which is all about food independence. And I am the co-host of the Positively Green podcast. My family of origin is from Haiti and migrated here to the United States in the 1960s. So I'm the very first born in the United States and grew up in this area and have come to really love it here.
You are quite the vermicomposter. So for the listeners who are unfamiliar with what is vermicomposting?
Vermicomposting is very simply using worms to compost your food versus the method where you mix brown and your food, brown like dried leaves or paper and your food, and then just let it do its composting thing naturally. Worms speed up the process by a lot. So if it would take, a year for food to break down normally, worms can do it in 4 months. It's really fast.
So if somebody was interested in starting vermicomposting, how do they go about setting up a system to be a worm farmer?
So first of all, let me say I absolutely love worm farming. It's something that I never thought I would get into. It's a little nerdy, as you said, because it's so much about the science of it all. But the worms that I use are red wiggler worms. And I got them from a friend of mine who had a worm bin in her backyard. So what you need is a plastic bin. And I don't like plastic. This is how you got to do the worm bin, either that or wood, and then replace that every few years. But we can talk about that a little bit later. You have a multi-tiered plastic bin that has holes in it. So you can also do this with 5-gallon buckets, drill some holes in the bottom. And I have some pictures of this on my website and on my YouTube channel. You can find a demo there. So the worms are put together with your food. And I like to use shredded paper from my office. So I'm always shredding paper. I take that shredded paper, I put it in with the food that we have, from food waste. So I'm talking about peels and, not pits usually, because pits will grow new food inside your compost bin. I just learned that recently. I'll tell you about that too. But you combine your food waste with the paper, put the worms in there, and then they start going to work.
Today, you'll meet Christina Fordyce.
So I grew up in Salem, Oregon. My mom homeschooled me and my 2 brothers. So getting outdoors and doing a little bit of gardening was definitely part of growing up, because you do kind of everything when you homeschool and everything counts as school. But we had a number of friends that owned a little bit of land, including the Fordyce family, who we met through one of our homeschooling groups. And it turns out I actually had a crush on the oldest boy, Graham, when I was a kid. More on that later. But other than just knowing a few families in the area that were agricultural families, I didn't really have as much of a history in agriculture growing up. I did a little bit of 4-H, but I was just always interested in gardening, did some with my grandma. That was really important to my relationship with her. But I didn't get into farming as a career until after college. I actually reconnected with the Fordyces after college, and Graham and I started talking some more, and one thing kind of led to another, and there's a whole huge long backstory on that. But we ended up getting married in 2018, and I knew that farming definitely came with that because he grew up on his family farm. So that was how I married into farming, basically. And then ever since 2018, I've been learning more and more about how the family farm is run until the present, where I have actually a pretty big role administratively and in many other areas on our farm.
You talked about how the farm has kind of diversified through the generations. So tell us what you are growing. I don't think we fully said exactly what it is that your crop is specifically yet. So tell us what you're growing on the farm and all of the different entities that you have going on there.
Well, when my husband does this whole litany, it's a lot faster and kind of overwhelming. It's really funny. But we started with strawberries. That was the very first thing in the 50s. And then blueberries were next, order of what we added next. But so now we still do strawberries and blueberries. We also do raspberries, blackberries, currants, gooseberries, several varieties of apples, Asian pears, a few varieties of plums. And then we also do a pumpkin patch in the fall along with a corn maze. And then we have been doing veggie starts ever since last year. People got really into gardening in the last couple of years. So we decided that would be a really great way to serve our community by planting seeds and doing things like tomato plants, cucumber plants, pepper plants. I think we had some lettuce starts last year. And this year I'm also going to try my hand at doing some annuals and herbs as well, just to try and branch out a little bit more in that area. I must be missing something though. Like, we do all kinds of things.
This week, you'll meet Norma Fordyce.
I'm Norma Jean Fordyce, and I live here in Salem, Oregon. I was born in Hays, Kansas, to parents and grandparents that were wheat farmers. And we moved to Oregon when I was 5, and I've been here in Salem since then.
Yeah.
And when we were married, we decided that we wanted to start out with strawberries. 5 acres of strawberries on rented ground. And at that time, that was in 1958, 59, 60 in there, where we had just a woman who would help get pickers. And it was all local people then. This was before we had any migrants in the area. And also strawberries at that time were dryland farming. That meant there was no irrigation. And so we were among the first, not the first, among the first to put in an irrigation well, which meant the tonnage would go from 3 to 4 ton to the acre up and higher. So because then with irrigation, we were getting higher tonnage, the Oregon Strawberry Commission started what they call the 500 Club. That says if you got 5 ton to the acre and got more than 50 ton, you could get an award. So my husband was the first to get an award for higher tonnage in Marion County at that time. Later, we've also got another award for 10 ton to the acre. And so in those days, my husband said, I'd been hoeing the strawberries and raising 4 little boys, 3 at the time. And he says, can you be a row boss? Well, I picked strawberries growing up. I knew what they were like, but I took on more responsibility for getting pickers, and Bob would go pick them up in the old truck with racks on them and bring them out. We'd take the racks off, stack the berries up, and take the pickers home, and then take the berries into the cannery. But we worked up to where there was buses and more acreages. And at that time, in the late 60s or in the 60s somewhere, the employment department would go to the schools and they'd interview the kids and talk to them about strawberry picking. And if they wanted to go out strawberry picking, they would leave their name and address and phone number. So I would go into the employment office and get their names and sit down and call a bunch of people and try to get a busload of people. We rented buses then, school buses in the summertime. And then I would map out the route and Bob would drive the route. I ended up driving around too later. Yeah, so we worked up to 30 acres of strawberries at that time and then started with other crops too.
This week, you'll meet MacKenzie Kozlowski.
Yes, I found agriculture and Alberta in a very unique way. I am originally from the United States, grew up in Seattle, and then lived about half of my adult life in Los Angeles, and was living kind of between those two quite frequently. And while I was in Los Angeles, I went to university and kind of got my first adult job, which led me to finding yoga. And once I found yoga, I was basically obsessed and was going to do anything and everything I could do to make yoga my life. And I was really fortunate at the time to have had some of the most well-known teachers in the world be my teachers, and that sprung me forward into my own teaching career. And one of my teachers published a book with Women's Health, The Big Book of Yoga, and I was one of the models for that book and started gaining a lot of recognition that way. So I started traveling the world and teaching yoga workshops. One of those workshops led me to Red Deer, Alberta. And I came to Alberta for the first time. I had been to BC before. That was about the only place in Canada I had visited. And while in Red Deer, I was teaching one of my classic backbending workshops. And there's one male in the class. And it's a bit of a spoiler alert, but it's my now husband, Mike, who has been running Steel Pony Farm in Red Deer County for the past this is our 12th season.
Talk to us more about Steel Pony Farm, how you came about your CSA and all about what you're producing on the farm.
Yeah, so it's not really my story to tell, but like we've been talking about, Mike got into farming when he went on a trip to Kenya, and he was in a small town in Kenya, and they had asked him, "Where does your food come from?" And he was like, "The grocery store." And they're like, "Well, what is a grocery store?" And he is like, "It's where you go and buy food." And they were like, "Oh, okay, tell us about your grocery store's farm." And he is like, "My grocery store doesn't have a farm. It has lots of farms." And they just couldn't wrap their head around this idea. And then it made him realize, I don't actually know where my food comes from, how it's grown, anything. And so he came back to Canada and started touring around local farms, learning about agriculture. We grow a wide variety of products: carrots, beets, onions, celery, celeriac, kale, spinach, mixed greens, rosemary, oregano, thyme, mint, sage. One of our biggest crops would be garlic. And then we planted this year, I think 18,000 heads of garlic. And then what else? We do all the squashes, summer squash, winter squashes. Yeah, lots of kale, a lot of kale.
This week, you'll meet Renee Gould.
I'm Renee Gould, and I grew up on a horse right from itty bitty all the way up until now, until I had kids. I've been riding my horses, but I did pony clubs since I was 6, and then all the way on until I was 18. So that's show jumping. And I worked at a show jumping barn for a lot of years. And then I ended up playing a sport called polo cross, which is like lacrosse on horses. And with polocrosse, I got to go and travel the world and become almost like professional at that sport. And then I ended up going to university at the University of Lethbridge. And then after university, I met my husband online and moved to the farm and fell in love with it. I helped them feed cows. I helped them build fences. I helped them do all of the farm things. We have about 300 cows, cow-calf pairs, and then we have about 10,000 acres, but we're only farming like for cash crop, 4,000. So like big enough for a family farm. Just it's my husband and his mom and his stepdad. They are the main workers on the farm. So I was a newcomer, and then I had kids, and it was unexpected, but I have to say that I didn't love it. I loved going out and helping with the chores. I loved feeding cows. I loved going combining, swathing, making meals, building fences. I loved being outside. I loved being with my husband. And when I had kids, I couldn't do that.
I was just going to say thank you for saying that and being so vulnerable right off the bat, because, that's something that I'm sure a lot of people have felt. And especially in this life where you get to try all of these new exciting things on a farm, and then all of that changes immediately. And all of the changes you go through as a woman in your life anyways, and just becoming a mother is a huge change. And then having to adapt with all of these different things. So thank you for saying that. Where did your love of horses come from?
Yeah, so my whole family rode. We always rode together. My mom, my dad, and my sister. So we all played the sport polocrosse together, and we traveled all over. So we drove all over the States. We've actually gone to Australia, South Africa, France, and often we were all playing on the same team. So horses, was our family thing.
Today, you'll meet Liane Reeves.
I am middle-aged. I'm 45, first of all. So, normally age is not a super important thing, but when I tell you I've only been farming for 2 years, it was a bit of a change. So I come from Ontario. I'm living in Nova Scotia now. And in Ontario, I lived in a city my whole life. And I worked in the hospitality industry, so museums and hotels and things like that. 2 years ago, mid-pandemic, my husband and I kind of looked at each other and said, this can't be it. We've got to have more of an adventure. And so we started looking for land at that point and found our property that we're on now in Nova Scotia and thought, why not? And so 2 years ago, we made the big leap. And ever since, we have been homesteading. I would call it homesteading. It's pretty small so far. But yeah, it's been quite the adventure. So that's who I am.
You've talked about this was a Christmas tree farm. So describe to us the physical landscape of your homestead, because I can guarantee you it's a little bit different than what I'm looking at through my window here.
Oh, I can guarantee it too. It's a little bit different from most of Nova Scotia, to be honest with you. So we're on the eastern shore of Nova Scotia, and the eastern shore is known for being rocky. So we are on bedrock. So if we're lucky, we have about 4 inches of soil cover, but in most places we don't. So evergreens or fir trees, they grow out rather than down. So they're perfect for this kind of landscape. And we're really learning that now after Hurricane Fiona, because so many trees have upended. So we know that there's rock immediately underneath them. But there's no pasture here. There's no grass. There's a little bit of grass in front of the house because we put it in. But if we want grazing animals, we have to A, clear the land, and then B, somehow figure out how to grow the grass and things like that. So Christmas tree farm was perfect for here. Those Christmas trees are now 40 feet tall. So yeah. And I'm not willing to scale up them just to top them. So So, every time that we want to bring in an animal, we have to first decide, is it an animal that will thrive in a forest location? Or do we have to this year clear the land and start creating soil there so that we can get ground cover for that animal? So it's almost a 2-year planning phase if we want kind of, grazing animals. I really want sheep, but it's going to take 3 years for me to get pasture enough for them. So that's what our farm looks like. It's beautiful and it's big, but it's very challenging.
Today, you'll meet Rebecca King.
I live in East Central Alberta, closer to Lloydminster, actually just off of the Saskatchewan border. And I was basically born and raised in the area, grew up on an acreage. However, my mom came from a huge family farm where we spent lots of time and learned the value of the land and, everything that comes along with farming. And when I was in grade 11, I was blessed with meeting my future husband. At the time I was DJing. I did a lot of DJing on the side to, make money to go to college and put fuel in my car, that type of thing. And he happened to be at one of the gigs that I was playing for, and he came up on stage and he asked me to dance. And I thought, wow, look at him. So anyways, long story short, from that day on, so I was very young. From that day on, we spent a lot of time together. And by the time I was 19 years old, we were married and jumped onto his family farm. And basically from there on, we built up, and you're still on that farm today.
Rebecca, you shared with us in your previous mini interview the loss of Donald, and you have been so gracious to come back and share your full story with us here today. Can you tell us about the farm after Donald's passing and the journey that it's taken to get you to where you are today?
Well, I'd have to rewind a little bit just to kind of give a bit of a foreground. The farm today has transitioned a lot. And I actually, for the most part, AFSC calls me a complicated farming situation because they helped me do up some agreements that I have with mine and Donald's best farmer buddies ever. Like, honestly, we could not ask for better farmer friends around here. Like, they're just wonderful. And, they've just been so good to help me, and they laugh at me a lot. I know they do, but it's okay because I'm good with it. But yeah, right now I have what we call a commodity share agreement is what we call it. And it seems to work really well for me for now. And I'm just basically maintaining the farmyard and kind of going through things and transitioning. Like, I didn't keep very much of the equipment because at the time my girls were 16, 14, and 9, and we were extremely active family. The girls were in lots of sports, lots of elite sports, music lessons, were very active in the community on different volunteer positions. And yeah, so I wanted to continue to maintain as much normalcy that way with the girls as I could. And me trying to do farm fully on my own with the girls it just simply was not feasible. And nor would I even have been able to be close to affording to hire people to help me with that. And part of that is with the accident, not only did I have liability lawsuits that took a lot of time, like in terms of years for them to be settled, I also had a litigation against my husband's family. And that's a story in itself that I'm more than willing to share. It put me through hell, which is consequently why my relationship, I think, with Don's family has been so difficult.
Today, you'll meet Elizabeth Goad.
My name is Elizabeth. I am from a small town in upstate New York called Parrish. And I'd have to say my earliest memory of being involved in agriculture wasn't until I was in high school. And the beef farmer around the corner from us had to have a hip surgery done. And he needed somebody to help clean his barn and feed his cows while he was recovering. And that is when I started in, like, I call it real agriculture because I've always had horses, but taking care of somebody else's animals is what really got me started. And I would get on my horse and ride my horse down to the farm every morning and clean out the gutters and feed the calves and feed the rest of the cows. And then check the fence real quick and run back home on the horse and then get ready for school. And then when I got home from school, I'd do it all again. So that's my earliest memory of it. And from then on, I continued to work on horse farms. And then
So you also have become quite the gardener and canner on your property. Yeah. Tell us more about growing your food.
I am completely self-taught. And well, last year was a great success with my garden, and the year before. This year, and it is important to admit our failures, this year was a complete failure for growing anything. I couldn't grow anything but a sunflower. I have to do some soil testing and see what's going on there. But I am self-taught. Usually, when the year goes right, I grow zucchini, garlic, onions, carrots, a lot of root vegetables, anything that I can process or put away to feed my family through the winter. Or, if everything goes crazy, I've got stockpile in the basement that I can feel secure that we don't have to go to the store or, those things. So I do love to can, which I am self-taught there too. I remember as a child that my grandmother made jelly and my mother made jelly, and that's how I started. I had Emma, so this is 5 years ago, somewhere in there. And I'd get her, bundle her up on my back. We'd go out to the strawberry field and we'd pick berries or blueberries, whatever was in season. And with her on my back, we would be processing the jelly. And I started hearing more about pressure canning. And it's scary when you don't know much about it. Like all you see is the pictures on Facebook with the lid through the ceiling. So it was scary to learn, but once I learned how to use the canner, just the other night, I had forgotten to pull meat out of the freezer, and I went down the basement and got a jar of canned chicken and was able to make a casserole within 15 minutes.
Today, we'll be speaking to Ashley Sutton.
So my name is Ashley. I grew up about an hour or so outside of New York City. And so I grew up in a very suburban area. It was very regular to go to New York City to have dinner or go to shows or things. And then I found myself out in Colorado for grad school. And out there, I met my husband. And so he grew up more in a rural area of upstate New York, close to the Albany area. And so he grew up more heavily involved in agriculture. He was milking cows, and he bred sheep for a little while and things. And so one of his big things was, hey, once we get done with school, I want to have some animals. And I was like, okay, if that's what you want to do, I'll give it a shot. And then, so we were out in Colorado for a little while. We ended up getting some chicks from Tractor Supply. Like probably everybody says, chickens are like the gateway drug to homesteading and farming. And then once we moved back east to Vermont, we continued with the chickens. We raised some pigs. We do meat birds every year. And we have 2 dairy cows now. So we are in the thick of it. And then we do a bunch of gardening and things and preserving and canning. And so I guess my husband kind of threw me in it, but I'm very happy that he did.
Tell us about your current operation and what did you guys start with? You said you went to Tractor Supply and got the chickens, but how have you grown from there?
So our current property, it's just like a house with a decent amount of land, but it's not like, or it wasn't, I guess, a farm by any means. So we had to build all of the outbuildings and stuff that we have now. And so we put together a chicken coop. Our first spring, I guess it would have been March of 2020, I guess. And so we started with that, and then we had our laying hens, and then we did, I think, 50 meat chickens our first year. And then that first year also, we got some feeder pigs. I think we started with 2 pigs the first year, and we grew them. We actually had a pig roast for our wedding that year. That was like very cool to be able to like feed our family and friends with something that we like grew directly from a little piglet. And everybody said it was so delicious. It's the best pork they ever had. And I was like, yeah, that's because, you know, like we're feeding it well. Like the animals are happy. They're out, they're running around in the grass and having a good old life. And then the next year in the spring is when we decided to get a dairy cow. And so she was a pregnant heifer at that time. So she had her first calf here. And then that same year, we like did the whole meat birds again. I think we did 150 that year. So we like scaled up quite a bit. And we were able to sell some of that, which was great. And then we did pigs again. And now we're in our 3rd year, and we scaled back on the meat chickens quite a bit just because of, I guess, like the time investment and things. Both me and my husband, we have off-farm jobs. And so it was a lot for us to do all of the processing and everything all ourselves. And we didn't do pigs this year because freezer's still packed full of pork from last year. And so this year we just have the chickens and the cows. And that's keeping us plenty busy.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to the Rural Woman Podcast. The Rural Woman Podcast is more than just a podcast. We are a community. A huge thank you to the Rural Woman Podcast team, audio editor Max Hofer, and admin support from Kim & Co. Online. A special thanks to our Patreon executive producers, Sarah Riedner from Happiness by the Acre and Carrie Munven from Laystone Farms. To learn how you can become a Patreon executive producer or other ways to financially support the show, head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen to the podcast to get the latest episodes directly on your playlist. And if you are loving the show, please be sure to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other platform that accepts ratings and reviews. You can connect with us on social media at The Rural Woman Podcast and with me at Wild Rose Farmer. One of the best ways you can support the show is by sharing it. Send this episode to a friend or share on your social media. Let's strengthen and amplify the voices of women in agriculture together. Until next time, my friend, keep sharing your story.